She didn't go there to end her relationship. She went there for answers. What Evelyn Carter found instead was her boyfriend tangled in silk sheets with her best friend in a bedroom that cost more than her rent for a year. She didn't scream. She didn't beg. She turned and walked away with her head high and her heart destroyed. But what she didn't know was that someone had been watching from the shadows the entire time. And that man, the most feared criminal in the city, saw something in her silence that changed everything. If you want to know how the worst day of Evelyn's life became the beginning of something dangerous and extraordinary, stay with me until the very end. Hit that like button and tell me in the comments which city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Evelyn Carter had always believed heartbreak came with warning signs: a missed call, a forgotten birthday, the slow drift of someone's attention moving toward a door they hadn't opened yet. Her therapist friends called it the fade, the gradual withdrawal, the quiet way people left before they actually left. She was wrong about all of it. Heartbreak didn't warn you. It detonated. She climbed the steps of the Bellini mansion at 6:15 on a Tuesday evening in early November, her phone clutched tight in her hand. Noah's name sitting unanswered in her call log for the 72nd time in 3 days. 72 calls. Not one answer. Not one text. Just silence stretched so thin it had started to feel like cruelty. The door was unlocked. She pushed it open anyway. The foyer swallowed the sound of her footsteps. Marble floors. Ceilings that made the air feel smaller than it was. Art on every wall that probably had names she'd never learn. She'd stood in this house dozens of times as Noah's girlfriend, always feeling slightly out of place, always performing a comfort she didn't quite possess. Tonight felt different. Tonight the house felt like it was watching her. She called his name once. The word bounced off the walls and came back empty. She climbed the grand staircase, one hand trailing the banister, her pulse picking up the way it does when your body understands something your mind hasn't caught up to yet. She knew which room was his. She'd been there before. Never without an invitation. Never without him standing at the door with that boyish smile that made her forget everything she suspected about his family's name. The door was slightly open. Later, she would remember this moment with the kind of clarity that only comes from catastrophe. The way the hallway seemed to narrow. The way her heartbeat filled her ears. The way something animal and primal inside her screamed to turn around and walk back down those stairs and never come back. She was 26 years old. She'd been raised to believe that love meant fighting for things that mattered. So she pushed the door open. The room smelled like expensive cologne, and something she would only later identify as the particular scent of a life falling apart. The bed, the silk sheets, the afternoon light making everything sharp and brutal and impossible to misread. Noah, disheveled, flushed, eyes snapping to her with an expression she had never seen on his face before and hoped to never see again. And Jessica, her best friend since sophomore year of college, sitting up slowly, unhurried, like she'd been expecting this and had already decided how she wanted to play it. The sound that came out of Evelyn's throat was small. She would never be able to describe it accurately. It wasn't a scream. It was something underneath screaming. Something that lived in the body before language had words for it. Noah scrambled for the sheet. Evie, wait, I can explain. This isn't what it looks like. Jessica said it with a straight face. Evelyn stared at her. It looks like my boyfriend is sleeping with my best friend in his father's mansion. Let me explain. Noah was on his feet, the sheet wrapped around his waist, his dignity already beyond saving. How long? Evelyn heard herself ask. She didn't know why the question mattered. Betrayal was betrayal, whether it lasted a week or a year. But she needed something to hold on to, some number to put in the space where trust used to live. Jessica answered before Noah could. Does it matter? You were never right for him, Evelyn. You're too ordinary, too safe. She said safe like it was a disease. Noah needs someone who understands his world. Someone who isn't going to ask too many questions about where the money comes from, or why certain men in suits show up at dinner and never eat anything. Evelyn looked at Noah. Is that what I was to you? A vacation from your real life? That's not fair. His voice cracked at the edges. I love you. Don't. Evelyn stepped back. Don't say that word right now. Not in this room. Not standing there. She was always temporary. Jessica's voice was smooth, surgical. You were his rebellion. His walk on the safe side. The nice girl from a normal family who made him feel like something other than what he actually is. You were always going to end up here. You just didn't know it yet. Every word found its mark. Because the worst part about being told something you've secretly feared is that the fear was already doing the damage before the words arrived. Evelyn felt tears building behind her eyes and refused them. Not here. Not in front of this woman who had eaten dinner at her table and cried on her shoulder and borrowed her jacket and spent 8 years collecting ammunition for exactly this moment. We're done. Her voice came out steadier than she deserved. Don't call me. Don't text me. Whatever this was, it's finished. She turned and walked out. Turned and, one foot in front of the other. Head up, shoulders back. The kind of dignity that costs everything you have. She was halfway down the staircase when she felt it. The sensation of being watched. Specific and certain. Not the ambient awareness of being in a house full of staff and security. Something deliberate. Something focused entirely on her. You walk away from betrayal better than most men I've known. The voice came from the doorway of the library. Deep. Measured. The voice of a man who had never once needed to raise it to be heard. Evelyn turned. Victor Bellini. She'd seen him in passing. Glimpsed him at family gatherings where she'd always drifted toward the edges. But she had never actually looked at him. Not like this. Not this close. He was taller than she remembered. Or maybe he simply occupied space differently than other men. Late 40s, silver threading through dark hair swept back from a face that had probably been beautiful once and had since become something harder and more precise. A three-piece suit tailored within an inch of its life. Dark eyes that had seen things most people wouldn't survive knowing. Mr. Bellini? She managed to make it sound almost steady. Victor. He moved toward her the way certain animals move. Unhurried, but absolutely purposeful. Mr. Bellini was my father. He's been dead for 20 years, though I think he would have appreciated your composure just now. I didn't know anyone was here. This is my home. I'm always here one way or another. He stopped a few feet away. I heard raised voices. I came to investigate. How long were you watching? Long enough to see my son demonstrate exactly the kind of man I failed to raise him not to be. Something shifted behind his eyes. And long enough to see you refuse to fall apart in front of people who were hoping you would. The bluntness of it took her breath. She hadn't expected honesty from him. She'd expected dismissal. Maybe a polite suggestion that she see herself out. I should go. She moved to step around him. His hand caught her wrist. Not hard. Precise. The grip of a man who understood exactly how much pressure changed a situation. I have a proposition for you. Every alarm in her body activated simultaneously. I'm not interested in whatever you're offering. Revenge. He said the word simply. Real revenge. Not gossip or social media or slashed tires. I'm talking about the kind of damage that lives inside a person and doesn't leave. The kind my son will feel every single day for the rest of his life. Evelyn stopped. Why would you want to hurt your own son? Because he's weak. Because he's reckless. Because he's spent his entire life watching consequences bounce off other people while he walked away untouched. Victor released her wrist slowly. And because what he did to you shows a fundamental disrespect that I find intolerable. You don't know me. I know enough. His voice was calm as reading from a file. You work at Hope Harbor, the nonprofit for trafficking victims. You grew up in Portland. Your father was a teacher. Your mother was a nurse. Both deceased. Master's degree in social work from Columbia. $73,000 in student loans. You drive a 10-year-old Honda. You live in a 5th-floor walk-up in Queens. You volunteer at the animal shelter on weekends. Evelyn felt the floor shift beneath her. You had me investigated. Thoroughly. You came back clean. More than I can say for the last 3 women my son brought through this house." She should have been terrified. She was terrified. But underneath the terror was something else. A cold and clarifying fury. Because this man had done more research on her in the background of her relationship than Noah had bothered to do in 18 months of standing right in front of her. 5 minutes. Victor stepped aside and gestured toward the sitting room. "If you don't like what you hear, you'll never see me again." She should have walked out the door. She knew that. Every reasonable part of her knew that. But Reasonable had just watched her boyfriend and her best friend destroy 8 years of trust in a single afternoon, and Reasonable wasn't feeling particularly authoritative at the moment. 5 minutes, she said. The sitting room was dark wood and leather, and bookshelves lined with first editions that probably hadn't been opened in decades. Victor poured 2 glasses of amber whiskey and handed her one without asking. She took it. "What are you proposing?" she asked. "Marriage." The word landed like a stone dropped into still water. Evelyn actually laughed. A sharp, involuntary sound. "You're not serious." "I am always serious, especially about business arrangements." He settled into a chair and crossed one leg over the other with the ease of a man who had never once been uncomfortable in his own skin. "You marry me. You take the Bellini name. You become part of this family in the most official and public way possible." That's insane. It's strategy. Noah has spent his entire life competing with me. For authority, for respect, for the legacy he assumes he'll inherit. Now imagine what it does to him when the woman he betrayed, the woman he considered too ordinary for his world, becomes his stepmother. When she sits at the head of this table, when she bears the name he takes for granted. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. Like watching someone construct a perfect weapon from the wreckage of something that used to be love. Why would you do that to your own son? Because he needs to understand that his choices have weight. Victor studied her with an intensity that made her want to look somewhere else. She didn't give him that. "And because you interest me, Evelyn Carter. You walked into a scene that would have sent most people into pieces. You left with your head up. That kind of composure is rare, it's valuable, and it's completely wasted on a man who couldn't see it. I'm not a prize. No. You're a woman who's been wronged. And I'm offering you the resources to make sure the people who wronged you understand exactly what they threw away." Evelyn looked down at the glass in her hand. Upstairs, Noah was probably already spinning his version of events for Jessica. By tomorrow, they would have a story, an explanation, a way to make her the problem in all of it. People like that always found a way to make themselves the victims of the damage they caused. What does this actually look like? She heard her voice asking the question before she'd consciously decided to ask it. "If I said yes, which I haven't. We marry within the month. Quick engagement, very public announcement. You'd live here in the East Wing. Separate quarters, complete privacy. We share spaces for appearances, family dinners, public events. I'd expect discretion and loyalty. And in return, financial security beyond anything you've imagined. Protection from anyone who might wish you harm, and the funding to expand Hope Harbor into something that could reach 3 times the people you currently help." He paused. "Imagine what you could do with real political connections and unlimited resources." "What about intimacy?" She forced herself to ask it directly. "Are you expecting me to—" "No." He cut her off cleanly. "Unless that became something we both wanted, this would be a marriage in name only. I don't coerce people, Evelyn. That particular cruelty holds no interest for me." She should have felt reassured. Instead, she felt something more complicated stirring in her chest that she wasn't ready to examine. "I need time. You have until tomorrow night. Come to Giano's on 5th at 8 o'clock. He reached into his jacket and produced a card. "If you show up, I'll take that as your answer. If you don't, we never speak of this conversation again." She took the card. Their fingers brushed briefly. His hands were warm and absolutely steady. "One more thing." He spoke just before she reached the door. "Your friend Jessica has been feeding information about Noah to the Costello family for 3 months. They're rivals of mine. Noah's too blinded to see he's sleeping with someone who's actively working against his family. Evelyn turned slowly. Why are you telling me that? Because I want you to understand that what you saw upstairs was the surface of something much uglier. The betrayal goes deeper than a bedroom. She was never your friend. She was using both of you for her own agenda. And if you walk away from this tonight and never come back, that's your right. But know that the people who hurt you are worse than you imagine, and they will never face a single consequence unless someone makes them. She walked out of the Bellini mansion into cold November air, sat in her car for 20 minutes, with her hands shaking too badly to start the engine, and stared at a business card that felt heavier than a business card had any right to feel. She drove home, climbed 5 flights of stairs, locked her door, stood in a shower until the water ran cold, and at her kitchen table at 2 in the morning, laptop open, coffee going cold beside her, Evelyn Carter began researching Victor Bellini the way she researched everything that mattered. Thoroughly, without flinching, following every thread until she understood what she was actually considering. What she found painted the picture she expected. A man who had built a criminal empire on violence and fear and calculated brutality that touched half the legitimate businesses in the city. But there was something else. Donations to children's hospitals, always anonymous, always traceable if you knew where to look. A scholarship fund for underprivileged kids. And there, buried in the financial records of a shell company, she almost missed a substantial grant made 3 years ago to a small nonprofit organization serving trafficking victims in Queens. Hope Harbor. Victor Bellini had been funding her work before he ever laid eyes on her. Evelyn sat back from the screen and stared at that number for a long time. Morning came without sleep. She called in sick for the first time in 3 years and spent the day making lists she kept throwing away, running arguments in circles that always ended in the same place. By 7:45 that evening, she was standing in front of her closet pulling out the only black dress she owned that didn't look like she'd bought it for a funeral. At 8:15, she walked into Giano's. Victor was already there. Corner table, back to the wall. He stood when he saw her, and in that single gesture, Evelyn recognized something she had not received from Noah in 18 months of a relationship she had believed in completely. She was being treated like she was worth standing for. She sat down. A waiter appeared with wine she hadn't ordered. Victor had anticipated her. Not her answer, maybe, but her arrival. "You came," he said. "I came," she agreed. They ate, they talked. He told her about his grandmother, about a woman who had married during a war between families and become the bridge that ended decades of bloodshed. He opened the velvet box and held it toward her without ceremony and without theater. A square-cut diamond that caught the candlelight like trapped starfire. This was hers, he said. She understood that sometimes marriage is strategy rather than romance. "I think she'd appreciate what we're building." Evelyn looked at the ring for a long moment. Thought about Noah's face when the news broke. Thought about Jessica's satisfied smirk in that bedroom. Thought about a lifetime of being careful and good, and still ending up devastated. Then she held out her left hand. Victor slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. "To revenge," he said, raising his glass. Evelyn raised hers. "To making people regret underestimating you," she answered. They drank, and Evelyn Carter, social worker victim. Quiet girl who bought her clothes at outlet malls and volunteered at animal shelters on weekends, felt something entirely new settle into her bones. Something that felt for the first time in her life exactly like power. The ring was still on her finger when she woke up the next morning. That was the first thing Evelyn checked. Before her phone, before the clock. Before she'd even opened her eyes fully, her left hand moved to confirm that the previous night had actually happened, that she hadn't dreamed the restaurant and the whiskey, and the man who'd slid a dead woman's diamond onto her finger like it was the most natural transaction in the world. It was still there. 3 carats of clarity catching the morning light and throwing it back at her in pieces. Her phone had 42 missed calls. Noah calling from numbers she hadn't blocked yet, working his way through what sounded like every device he owned. She read the first 3 messages, then stopped. Some variation of, "Please talk to me. You don't understand what you're doing. My father is dangerous and you're making a mistake you can't take back. She blocked every number and set the phone face down on the table. At exactly 9 o'clock, someone knocked on her door. Two men in dark suits, with the kind of stillness that comes from years of training, stood in her hallway. The taller one spoke first. Mr. Bellini sent us to assist with your transition. We have movers ready whenever you are. There are also security protocols we need to discuss. Evelyn stepped back to let them in. They moved through her apartment with professional efficiency, cataloging everything with quiet precision. Her second-hand couch. The water stain on the ceiling her landlord had been promising to fix for 2 years. The bookshelf she'd built herself from a kit that came with the wrong screws. Your lease has been terminated, the taller man said. Mr. Bellini purchased the building this morning. The other tenants are being relocated with appropriate compensation. She heard herself say, he bought the entire building. He did. In less than 12 hours. Yes. Evelyn stood very still for a moment, letting the reality of that land. Victor Bellini had decided she needed a clean exit, and so he'd simply removed the obstacle. No negotiation, no timeline, just a phone call and a signature, and the problem ceased to exist. She thought she should feel alarmed by that. Part of her did. But another part, the part that had spent 3 days watching Noah ignore 72 phone calls, recognized the difference between a man who treated problems like inconveniences and a man who actually solved them. I want my books, she said. My clothes, my grandmother's china. Everything else goes to charity. The shorter man pulled out a tablet and started making notes. Then he looked up with an expression that held something close to apology. Ms. Carter, before we begin, there are things you need to understand about what happens when your engagement becomes public. He showed her photographs. Evelyn had worked with trafficking victims for 3 years. She had sat across from women who had survived things that rewrote her understanding of human cruelty. She thought she had a reasonable tolerance for difficult realities. The photographs recalibrated that. A restaurant reduced to rubble tablecloths, still set for dinner among the wreckage. A car burned down to its skeleton. A woman before and after the second image, showing half her face destroyed by acid. Maria Costello, the man said quietly. She married into a rival family 5 years ago. Someone wanted to send her husband a message. Evelyn looked at every image without flinching. Why are you showing me this? Because Mr. Bellini insisted. He said you needed to make this choice with complete information. He also said that if you want to walk away right now, he'll handle everything personally, and there will be no consequences to you. She looked at the photographs one more time. Then she handed the tablet back. I'm not walking away. Teach me how to protect myself. For the next 2 hours, they did exactly that. Security protocols that felt like something from a spy film. How to check her car, how to vary her routes, how to recognize a tail in traffic. They gave her an encrypted phone with Victor's number as the only contact and showed her a panic button hidden inside what looked like a standard camera app. 3 seconds of pressure, the taller man said, and every Bellini security asset in the city gets your location. By noon, professional movers had arrived and were packing her life into boxes with a speed that suggested they'd done this many times before, under circumstances she was probably better off not knowing. Her real phone rang. A number she didn't recognize, but the area code was local. She answered, "You stupid, stupid girl!" Jessica's voice was stripped of every pretense. None of the warmth. None of the manufactured affection. Just raw venom undisguised. Do you have any idea what you've done? I'd say I know exactly what I've done. Evelyn kept her voice level. The question is whether you do. Noah told me about his father's little proposal, about you actually being pathetic enough to consider it. Jessica's laugh was the kind that cuts. You think marrying that man makes you powerful? You think it makes you anything other than someone who sold herself for revenge? The word she used landed with deliberate force. Evelyn felt nothing. Not hurt, not shame. Just a cold, clarifying calm settling over her like a second skin she hadn't known she'd been growing. Is that what you told yourself when you were feeding information about Noah to the Costello family? She said. When you were sitting at my kitchen table eating my food and borrowing my jacket and spending 8 years pretending to be my friend while you were building a file on the man you were sleeping with behind my back. Silence on the other end. The particular silence of someone who has just discovered their ammunition doesn't work. When Jessica spoke again, her voice had lost its footing. I don't know what lies Victor's been telling you. He told me you've been compromised for 3 months, that you were planted to gather intelligence on Bellini operations through Noah. Evelyn walked to her window. One of Victor's black SUVs was already parked across the street. How much are they paying you, Jessica? Is it worth it? Noah and I are in love. You're a liability he's too infatuated to recognize yet. Evelyn's voice was quiet and precise. Men like Noah don't end up with women like you. They use them until they become inconvenient, and then they make a phone call. At least I went into my arrangement knowing what it was. You convinced yourself the lie was real. That's not love. That's just a longer way to fall. You will regret this. The threat landed hollow. When you're trapped in that house with a man who makes decisions before breakfast that most people couldn't survive knowing, when you realize you traded your entire life for a con that was never going to pay out. Evelyn paused. I'll think of you, Jessica. I genuinely will. She hung up. One of Victor's men looked at her with something that was unmistakably respect. That felt good, he said. Terrifying, Evelyn admitted. But yes, by evening her apartment was empty. She stood in the bare living room and said goodbye to the woman who had lived there, the one who believed that being good was enough to protect you, the one who thought love was straightforward and people were mostly honest and heartbreak came with warning signs. She let that woman go. The drive to the Bellini estate took 40 minutes. 2 SUVs flanking the town car she rode in the security detail, watching the surrounding traffic with the attention of people who understood that danger moved in ordinary-looking vehicles on ordinary-looking streets. Victor was waiting on the front steps when they arrived. He'd changed out of the suit into dark slacks and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, and Evelyn noticed for the first time what she'd missed in the careful presentation of the man in the 3-piece armor. There was a physicality to him that his tailoring usually concealed, a solidity that suggested he was considerably more than a man who made phone calls and signed documents. Welcome home, he said. The word landed in a way she hadn't expected. Not comfortable exactly, but not wrong either. Strange definition of home, she said. You'll adjust. Most people do. He showed her to the East Wing, a suite that stopped her in the doorway, her books already unpacked filling shelves along the wall. Her grandmother's china displayed in a cabinet she'd never owned. The colors soft blues and grays matching the palette of her old apartment, but elevated into something she didn't have a word for yet. Fresh flowers on every surface. If anything isn't right, tell Mrs. Chen. Victor stood in the doorway, giving her space. Your clothes arrived. I had some additional items delivered as well, appropriate for the events you'll be attending. You thought of everything. I try to. He checked his watch. We have dinner with my lawyer in an hour. He'll go over the prenuptial agreement. You wanted legal guarantees. He's prepared something comprehensive. She turned to face him fully. What if I don't like the terms? Then we revise them until you do. His expression didn't shift. This only works if we both feel protected. The lawyer arrived precisely on time. Vincent Caruso, silver-haired and impeccably dressed, spread 37 pages across a conference table and walked her through every clause with the patience of someone who understood that this particular client was going to read every word. $10 million if the marriage dissolved in the first 5 years, $50 million at the 15-year mark. Her employment protected. Her movements unrestricted. Her financial accounts entirely her own. Evelyn sat back and looked at the numbers. Then she looked at Victor. This seems excessive. It's proportional to what you're risking by taking my name. His voice was matter of fact. Your safety, your reputation, potentially your life. Money is the least I can offer in return. She read every page before signing. With each signature, she felt a door closing behind her, the old life receding into something she was already struggling to remember clearly. When it was done, Vincent gathered his documents and excused himself with the practiced discretion of someone who had witnessed far stranger arrangements and kept every one of them confidential. The silence he left behind was thick with things neither of them had said yet. "There's one more clause I want added," Evelyn said. "A guarantee that Hope Harbor continues to receive funding regardless of what happens between us. If we divorce, if I die, if this all burns down, that organization keeps operating." Victor looked at her for a moment, with something she was beginning to recognize as the particular expression he got when she surprised him. "Done," he said. "Vincent will add it before the ink dries." He poured 2 glasses of whiskey, handed her one. "To complicated futures," he said. She clinked her glass against his. "To knowing exactly what we're getting into." They drank. Then he said, "Noah knows about the engagement. I told him this afternoon." Evelyn set down her glass. "How did he take it? Rage, accusations, threats to disown me as his father?" Victor's expression remained carefully neutral, but something moved behind his eyes. Something that wasn't quite grief, but lived in the same neighborhood. "He'll try to contact you before the wedding. I need you to not engage. And if he tries to stop the ceremony, he won't. He knows better than to make that kind of scene." A pause. "But security has been briefed regardless. The estate is in lockdown until after the ceremony. No one enters without my explicit authorization." Evelyn nodded. Then, because the hour was late and the whiskey had lowered whatever filter she'd been operating behind, she said, "Why did you really choose me, Victor? You could have married anyone. Someone who already understands your world. Someone who wouldn't need 3 weeks of crash course in surviving it." He was quiet for a moment. Long enough that she thought he might not answer. "Because someone from my world would come with ambitions of their own," he said finally. "They'd see marriage to me as a stepping stone. They'd spend every day calculating what they could extract." He turned to look at her directly. "You want to help people who've been destroyed by other people's cruelty. That's not an agenda. That's a compass. And a person with a compass doesn't suddenly change direction when the landscape gets complicated." "You trust my goodness," she said slowly. "I trust your clarity." His voice was quiet. "There's a difference." She left his study that night with more questions than she'd arrived with, and the strange sensation of something shifting in her chest that she absolutely refused to examine too closely. In her suite on the nightstand, she found a small box that hadn't been there before. Inside was a new phone more expensive than the encrypted one he'd already given her. A note in precise handwriting. Her old number disconnected to prevent Noah from harassing her. Her contacts transferred. The panic button location described in 2 clear sentences. No flourish, no explanation beyond what was necessary. He'd thought about her comfort while she was standing in his study, arguing about prenuptial clauses. Evelyn set the note down. Looked at her reflection in the dark window. She barely recognized the woman looking back. Good, she thought. She was just beginning to understand that the woman she'd been before had never been safe at all. She'd just been too close to the ground to see the danger coming. Mrs. Victor Bellini had a better view. Elena Bellini arrived at 2 in the afternoon, and Evelyn watched her from the window, the way you watch someone you've been warned about before meeting them in person. She was tall for 16, with her father's dark hair and the kind of stillness that didn't belong on a teenager. She moved like someone who had grown up understanding that the way you entered a room said something about you before you opened your mouth. She embraced Victor without the awkwardness most kids that age carried around their parents, and when he laughed at something she said, his whole face changed into something younger and less armored, and Evelyn felt like she was seeing something private she hadn't been meant to see. Then Elena looked up at the window. Even from that distance, the assessment was immediate and precise. The girl's eyes found Evelyn's and held them with an intelligence that made Evelyn straighten without meaning to. She had 15 minutes before the knock came. Elena appeared in the doorway of her suite without ceremony, jacket-gone dark eyes cataloging the room with the same systematic efficiency her father's security men had used. She settled into the window seat like she owned it, and looked at Evelyn with an expression that was neither hostile nor warm, just watching, measuring. "I figured we should talk before the awkward family dinner, where everyone pretends this is normal," Elena said. "That's probably wise," Evelyn said. "Come in. You were dating my half-brother. He cheated." Now you're marrying my dad to make Noah suffer." Elena said it the way someone else might recite a grocery list. "That's the basic outline, right?" "That's the basic outline." "It sounds like a telenovela. My mom loves those." Elena tilted her head. "But Dad doesn't do things on impulse, and he definitely doesn't get married without a reason that goes beyond just punishing Noah." "So what's the actual reason?" Evelyn looked at this 16-year-old who spoke like someone who had been lied to enough times to have developed an allergy to it. "Your father wants to teach Noah that consequences are real," she said, "and I want to stop being the kind of person who absorbs damage and calls it the price of being good." Something shifted in Elena's expression. Not approval exactly. Recognition. "I get that part," she said. "The world breaks people who won't fight back. I've seen it." She crossed her legs beneath her on the seat. "What I don't get is why you specifically. Dad could have used anyone." "He said I had integrity, that I was predictable in ways that made me safe." "Low bar," Elena said, "but accurate. His last girlfriend tried to plant listening devices in his office. She said it without drama, the way you mention weather. She disappeared. I've learned not to ask where people go when Dad's done with them." The casual weight of that sentence settled over Evelyn like something cold. "Does that bother you?" she asked, not knowing. "Would knowing change anything?" Elena's voice was steady. "He loves me. He protects me. He's also capable of things most people can't imagine. Both things are true at the same time. I stopped needing them to cancel each other out a long time ago." Evelyn recognized the architecture of that reasoning. The precise compartmentalization required to love someone completely, while acknowledging what they were capable of. She was building the same structure herself, brick by careful brick, and hearing it described so plainly by a teenager made her understand how much of her own future she was already constructing. "Are you angry about the marriage?" Evelyn asked. Elena considered it seriously. "No, confused a little. Curious, definitely." She leaned forward. "I know Dad wouldn't bring someone into this family who would hurt me. He might use you to hurt Noah, but he'd never risk my safety to do it. That means he trusts you, which is basically impossible to earn from Victor Bellini. So I want to understand what you did to make that happen in a week. I walked away from something that would have destroyed most people, and he saw it. That's it. That's apparently enough for your father." Elena was quiet for a moment. Then, with the directness of someone who had decided to stop circling, "Do you think you could actually fall in love with him? Real love. Not tolerance. Not strategy." The question landed in a place Evelyn hadn't let herself look. "I don't know," she said honestly. "Right now I barely know him. He's intelligent, and he says things that make me think in ways I'm not used to. But love seems like a dangerous complication neither of us planned for." "Love is always dangerous," Elena said. "That's what makes it the only thing worth having." She unfolded herself from the window seat and headed for the door. "I'm going to get breakfast. Wear the blue dress in your closet, the one with the tag still on it. It photographs well and makes you look like someone who chose this instead of someone it happened to." Then she was gone, leaving Evelyn alone with the particular silence of someone who has just been assessed and found tentatively acceptable. The photographers were waiting outside the gates the next morning. Victor's hand settled on the small of Evelyn's back as they walked to the car, and she felt every camera in the vicinity register that touch, that proximity, that presentation of two people who had chosen each other without apology. "Don't look at them," Victor said quietly, his mouth close enough to her ear that no lens could read his lips. "Look at me like I'm saying something mildly amusing." She turned her face toward his. This close, she could see the silver at his temples, the fine lines around his eyes, the particular quality of attention he gave to whatever was directly in front of him. When his eyes met hers, the smile that moved across her face was genuine before she'd decided to let it be. "Better," he said softly. The wedding planner's office gleamed with the specific whiteness of rooms designed for people who paid other people to manage their happiness. Vivienne Laurent greeted them with a professionalism that suggested she had planned ceremonies for people considerably more dangerous than Victor Bellini and had the discretion to have never mentioned any of them. They discussed flowers, music, Guest lists that had been security vetted before they reached the table. The bride's dress? Vivian asked, turning to Evelyn with genuine curiosity. Simple, Evelyn said. Elegant without trying too hard. Something that looks like an adult making an adult decision. Vivian made notes with the satisfaction of someone who had found an interesting challenge. Then her phone buzzed. Her professional composure cracked by a millimeter. I apologize. Someone has leaked your wedding date and location to the press. Photographers are already requesting access to the estate. The temperature in the room dropped. Victor stood without visible hurry, but something in the way he moved had changed. It wasn't your team, he said to Vivian, his voice flat and certain. We have a leak inside my organization. This is the second breach in 2 days. He turned to Evelyn. We need to go. The drive back was tense with purpose. Victor on his phone speaking in rapid Italian, while the security convoy moved through routes that changed twice without explanation. Evelyn watched the city pass and understood perhaps for the first time in a way that lived in her body rather than just her mind that she was inside something that didn't have clean edges. Is this normal? She asked during a pause between calls. No, which is why it is serious. His jaw was tight. Someone is mapping our vulnerabilities. Either they're planning something specific around the wedding, or they're trying to push us into making errors. Noah. The word came out before she filtered it. Victor looked at her. Possibly. He still has family access codes, old protocols he should have been locked out of months ago. A pause. Or it's the Costellos using the wedding as cover for something larger. Back at the estate, Victor disappeared into operational mode while Evelyn was escorted upstairs by guards who were no longer making any effort to look like anything other than what they were. Elena found her an hour later, dropping onto the couch in Evelyn's suite with the ease of someone claiming territory she'd already decided was safe. Dad's firing people, she said. 3 so far. He's still not satisfied. People are losing their jobs because someone told a reporter when we're getting married. People are losing their jobs because they proved they can't be trusted with information that keeps this family safe. Elena's correction was firm, almost rehearsed, like she'd said this to herself many times. I know it seems harsh, but I've watched what happens when Dad ignores a breach because it seems small. Small breaches become large ones. Large ones become funerals. Evelyn absorbed that. How do you carry it, all of it, knowing what your father is? Carefully. Elena pulled her knees to her chest. And with a lot of therapy. My mom makes sure I'm evaluated every 6 months. She wanted to make sure growing up in this world didn't rewire me in ways I'd regret. She paused. My therapist says I'm too good at compartmentalizing. I told her that's how I survive. She said that's the problem. Before Evelyn could respond, shouting erupted from downstairs. They were both on their feet without discussing it. From the top of the staircase, the scene below was precisely as bad as Evelyn had feared. Noah, disheveled and red-faced, held back by security guards, who looked like they were running out of patience. Victor, standing in the center of the foyer, immovable, his hands in his pockets, watching his son fall apart, with the expression of a man who had expected this and had prepared for it. You can't keep doing this. Noah's voice was cracking apart at the seams. She was mine. You don't take someone's girlfriend to punish them. That's not a lesson that's... Evelyn was never yours, Victor said. Quiet. Absolute. She was a person who made her own choices. You treated her like a convenience you could set down when something more interesting came along. Now she's made a different choice, and that choice doesn't include you. You're marrying her out of spite. She's 26 years old. 22 years difference. Yes, we've discussed the mathematics. Victor's voice didn't shift. But unlike you, I don't lie to her about who I am. Our arrangement is honest. That's more than she ever received from you. Noah's eyes found Evelyn at the top of the stairs. The anger in them fractured into something rawer, something that might have been genuine grief underneath all the performance. Evelyn, please, tell him you're being forced into this. She descended the stairs slowly, stopping at a distance that felt deliberate. I'm not being forced, she said. I made a choice, Noah. The same way you made yours when you decided Jessica was more interesting than what we built together. That was a mistake. I know that now. But this—" He gestured between her and Victor with something close to desperation. "This is revenge. This is you trying to hurt me the way I hurt you." "Yes," she said simply. The honesty seemed to physically stagger him. "It is revenge, and it's also a fresh start, and it's a chance to be someone other than the woman you cheated on." She held his gaze without flinching. "It's complicated, Noah, but it's my choice. He's a killer." Noah's voice dropped to something urgent, almost pleading. "You work with trafficking victims, and you're going to marry someone who probably profits from that same industry. Do you understand what you're—" "I've never touched that trade." Victor's voice cut across the room with a precision that silenced everything. In 25 years of business, that particular line has never been crossed, not once. Ask anyone in this city, ask the Costellos themselves. They'll tell you the same thing. You're protecting yourself. I don't lie to protect myself. Something darkened behind Victor's eyes. "But while we're discussing honesty, let's talk about the life you've been living on, money earned through exactly the violence you're condemning. The watches, the cars, the restaurants. You've spent 30 years benefiting from this empire while pretending to be too good to know where it came from." His voice dropped to something surgical. "Don't perform morality at me, Noah. You don't have the standing." The silence that followed was the loudest thing Evelyn had ever heard. Noah looked between them, his father's absolute stillness, Evelyn's steady resolve, and something in him simply stopped fighting the way a fire stops when you take away its air. "When this falls apart," he said finally, his voice stripped of everything except exhaustion, "don't expect me to pick up the pieces." The guards walked him out. The door closed. Victor looked up at Evelyn still standing on the stairs, and something passed between them that neither of them tried to name yet. Elena broke the silence from somewhere just behind Evelyn's shoulder. "That was brutal," she said quietly. "But you both needed to say it." Victor's eyes stayed on Evelyn. "Are you all right? Ask me when my hands stop shaking." She pressed them against her sides. "But yes, I'm all right." He held her gaze for one more moment. Something in his expression that was more honest than anything he'd said out loud. Then he straightened, and Victor Bellini, the patriarch, the kingpin, the man who ran a criminal empire with the precision of a chess grandmaster, was back in full. 2 weeks, he said. We move forward. Together, Evelyn said, and she meant it in every way she was only beginning to understand. The final 2 weeks before the wedding moved with the particular velocity of things that cannot be stopped once set in motion. The leak inside Victor's organization was traced to a low-level accountant with gambling debts who had sold the wedding date to a tabloid for $20,000. The man was gone from the city within 48 hours. Evelyn didn't ask where. She was learning which questions to carry and which ones to set down, and that one belonged on the floor. The wedding location changed 3 times as a precaution. The guest list was scrubbed twice. Victor's security team swept the estate with a thoroughness that suggested they were preparing for something considerably more serious than a ceremony. Through all of it, the nights were the strangest part. Evelyn kept waking at 2 or 3 in the morning, her mind running too fast for sleep to catch it. And twice, maybe 3 times, she wandered downstairs and found Victor in his study, exactly where she somehow knew he would be. Surrounded by papers. A glass of whiskey keeping him company. The lamp throwing long shadows across a face that looked different in the dark, softer at the edges, less constructed. The first time she appeared in his doorway, he looked up without surprise, like he'd been expecting her. "Can't sleep either," she said. "Rarely." He gestured at the chair across from his desk. "Sit." They talked until 4 in the morning about nothing that had anything to do with the wedding, or Noah, or the Costello family, or the security breach. He told her about inheriting his father's empire at 23, about the first year when he'd been certain every decision he made would be the one that collapsed everything. She told him about her mother's last 6 months, about sitting in hospital rooms, learning how to be present for someone who was leaving. About choosing social work not because it was noble, but because she genuinely did not know how to look at suffering and walk past it. He listened the way very few people actually listened, without preparing his response while she was still talking. The second night, she found him standing at the window instead of sitting at his desk. He heard her come in and didn't turn around immediately, and in that pause, she understood that he had his own 2 in the morning version of himself that he didn't show anyone during daylight hours. "My son called me tonight," he said, still facing the window. "Not to argue, just to ask if I actually cared about you, or if you were purely a weapon I was using against him." Evelyn stayed in the doorway. "What did you tell him?" "That the two things weren't mutually exclusive." He turned then. His expression was unguarded in a way she was still learning to read. "That I could care about you and still understand that marrying you sends Noah a message he needed to receive. Is that the truth?" "It's part of it." He crossed the room and poured whiskey into a second glass without asking, held it out to her. "The rest of the truth is something I'm still working out the language for." She took the glass. Their fingers touched briefly, and neither of them moved away immediately. "You should probably work it out before we stand in front of a judge and make promises to each other," she said. "I know." His voice was quiet. "Give me a few more days." She did. 5 days before the wedding, Evelyn left the estate for the first time since moving in. A necessary visit to Hope Harbor's office. Her supervisor pressing gently but persistently about transition plans and the consulting arrangement that would allow Evelyn to keep contributing without the full-time schedule that her new life made impossible. Marcus drove. Rodriguez rode in the second vehicle. She'd learned both their names by then, had learned that Marcus had a daughter who played soccer, and that Rodriguez made his grandmother's enchiladas every Sunday without exception. She was 3 blocks from the nonprofit's building when the car hit them. It came from the left, running the red light at full speed, and the impact was a sound she felt before she heard it. Metal and glass and the world tilting sideways in a way that her body understood as catastrophic before her mind caught up. The airbag hit her chest. Her seatbelt locked hard across her collarbone. The vehicle skidded and stopped, and for 2 full seconds there was absolute silence. Then Marcus's voice controlled and focused, despite the blood running down his face from a cut above his eyebrow. "Miss Carter, we need to move, right now. That was not an accident." She got out of the destroyed vehicle on legs that worked through some automatic function she wasn't consciously operating. Rodriguez's backup car was already there, the door open. Marcus's hand on her arm, guiding her inside with the practiced efficiency of someone who had trained for exactly this moment. "Base, we have a hostile intercept at Madison and 5th, Marcus said into his earpiece, pressing a hand to his forehead without breaking his report. "Package is secure. We need immediate extraction. Calling Priority Alpha." Priority Alpha. Every Bellini security asset in the city. Victor notified within 60 seconds. Her hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against her thighs and watched Marcus give his report, and understood with sudden clarity that these men, who she had known for 2 weeks, had just put themselves between her and something designed to kill her, and were treating it as a Tuesday. The encrypted phone rang before they were halfway back to the estate. "Are you hurt?" No greeting, just Victor's voice stripped of every layer of careful management. "No, bruised from the seatbelt, possibly whiplash, nothing broken." She heard herself delivering this information with a steadiness that surprised her. "Marcus is bleeding. Rodriguez is being taken to our medical facility. He'll be fine." A pause, and in that pause, she could hear Victor moving the sound of shoes on a hard floor doors opening. "The driver of the car that hit you is a known Costello associate. They timed it during one of your rare trips outside the estate. Planned, coordinated. This was not random. They were sending you a message. They tried to send it through you." His voice dropped to something she had not heard from him before. Something that sounded like fear, dressed in the only clothes he knew how to wear, which was fury. "Stay on the line until you're inside the walls." She stayed on the line. Victor was waiting on the front steps when they arrived. His security team around him, his expression locked down tight, but his eyes moving over her with an intensity that had nothing calculated in it. He pulled her out of the car himself. his hands on her shoulders checking for injuries with a thoroughness that felt more personal than medical. "You're sure you're not hurt?" "I'm sure." "You were almost killed." He said it quietly just for her. "They tried to take you from me before I even got to marry you." The possessiveness of it should have alarmed her. Standing there with the adrenaline still firing through her system and his hands still on her shoulders, it settled something instead, like an answer to a question she hadn't known she was asking. "Your people protected me," she said. "The system worked." The system almost wasn't enough. He released her, then stepping back, and the operational version of him returned like a mask snapping back into place. He turned to Marcus. "Report." Marcus delivered it in 60 seconds. Clean, precise, no editorializing. The timing of the intercept, the driver's identification, the coordination between vehicles that indicated multiple people involved. Victor listened without interrupting. Then, "Get Rodriguez whatever he needs. Take the rest of the day." He looked at his security team. "I want the driver's identity confirmed and a full account of who authorized this on the Costello side. I want it within 2 hours." He turned back to Evelyn. "Elena's inside. Go up. I'll be back before evening." "Where are you going?" "To have a conversation with the Costello family about what it means to touch something that belongs to me." "Victor." She caught his arm before he could move. Felt the muscle beneath her hand coiled and ready. "Don't start a war 5 days before our wedding. Be smart. Not just brutal." He looked down at her hand on his arm. Then up at her face, and something moved across his features that she had only seen once before in his study at 2 in the morning when he thought she wasn't watching closely enough. "I'll be smart," he said, "but I won't be gentle." He covered her hand with his briefly. 1 second, 2, then he was gone. Elena found Evelyn upstairs before she'd even sat down, appearing in the doorway of her suite with an expression that was all controlled worry, doing its best to look like calm. "How bad?" Elena asked. "I'm fine." "That's not what I asked." Evelyn sat down on the edge of the bed. The shaking in her hands was subsiding, but hadn't stopped completely. They ran the light at full speed. "Marcus got cut. Rodriguez is at the medical facility. I have a bruise across my chest from the seatbelt that's going to look spectacular tomorrow." Elena sat beside her without being invited close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "This is what Code Alpha feels like from inside it," she said. "I know that doesn't help. How many times has your father walked out that door to go have a conversation with someone who tried to hurt his family? More than I know about." Elena's voice was honest. "He always comes back. I've learned to hold on to that part." They sat together and waited. Victor returned 4 hours later, his jacket gone, his sleeves rolled up. The smudge of something dark on his collar that Evelyn recognized and didn't comment on. He found her in the sitting room, Elena dozing on the couch beside her, and he stood in the doorway, looking at the two of them for a moment before he spoke. "It's handled," he said quietly. "The Costellos have agreed to stand down. They'll deliver the driver to my people for questioning, and they've acknowledged that you are under my protection permanently. In exchange, I don't reduce their operation to rubble, and I acknowledge their message about Noah being a liability." "Jessica," Evelyn said. "She was feeding them information that cost them money. They wanted me to know so I'd handle it internally." His expression was flat. "Which I will." "Is she safe?" He looked at her for a moment. "She's being held. She'll be released when a satisfactory arrangement is reached. She won't be harmed." He said it like it was a concession he was making specifically for Evelyn's benefit, and she understood it as exactly that. Elena stirred on the couch, opened her eyes, looked at her father and said simply, "Good, you're back." Then she closed her eyes again. Victor crossed the room and sat in the chair across from Evelyn. He looked tired in the specific way of someone who had just done something they were accustomed to, but never quite comfortable with. "What you said before I left," he said, "about being smart instead of brutal." "Yes, I heard it." He looked at her steadily. "In 25 years, I don't think anyone outside this family has ever asked me to exercise restraint, and meant it purely because they were concerned about the consequences for other people." He paused. Usually people ask me to hold back because they're afraid of what I'll do. You asked because you didn't want anyone else to get hurt. Is that a problem? No. Something shifted in his expression, cracking open slightly at the edges. It's the opposite of a problem. That night, after Elena had gone to bed and the estate had settled into its nighttime rhythms, Evelyn found herself in Victor's study for the third time. But this time, she hadn't wandered there unconsciously. This time, she went because she wanted to. He was at his desk. He looked up when she came in and didn't pretend to be surprised. 4 days, she said. 4 days. He agreed. She crossed the room and stood in front of him and said what she had been building toward since the car hit them at Madison and Fifth, and she had heard his voice on the phone stripped of every performance. I need to ask you something, and I need an honest answer. I'll try. When you proposed this arrangement, was it purely about Noah, or was some part of it about wanting me specifically independent of what using me would cost him? The silence that followed was long enough to be its own answer. Victor set down his pen and looked at her with an expression she had not seen before, one that had no category yet in her understanding of him. Both, he said finally. In the beginning, mostly about Noah. But within an hour of sitting across from you in that restaurant, it became mostly about you. He stood, bringing them to the same level, and the space between them felt charged with everything neither of them had said yet. I haven't wanted someone to stay in a very long time, Evelyn. I'd forgotten what it felt like. You reminded me. She leaned up and kissed him. It wasn't the first time, but it was the first time it felt like a choice made in full daylight with no whiskey and no lateness of hour to blame it on. His hands framed her face with a gentleness that she suspected very few people in his life had ever received from him, and she understood that she was being held carefully by someone who knew exactly what his hands were capable of and was choosing something different. When they broke apart, she rested her forehead against his chin for a moment. 4 days, she said again. 4 days, he said. And his voice had something in it she had only heard once before in the study at 4 a.m. when he told her he was still working out the language for what he felt. It sounded like he had found some of the words. Noah came to the estate the following morning. Not drunk this time. Composed in the way of someone who had rehearsed what they were going to say and was determined to say it cleanly. Evelyn agreed to see him. 5 minutes. Elena present. Victor informed, but not in the room. He sat across from her and said, I know this is happening. I accept that. I'm not here to stop it. He looked at his hands, then back at her. I need to tell you something that has nothing to do with trying to change your mind. Jessica is missing. 3 days. The Costellos are looking for her, and I'm scared about what that means. Evelyn looked at him steadily. I know. Noah's eyes searched her face. You know? Your father told me. She's being held. She won't be hurt. That's as much as I can tell you. He absorbed that. Something complicated moved across his face. Relief mixed with something that might have been shame. I brought her into our lives. Into your life. I didn't know what she was, but I should have looked harder. Yes, Evelyn said. You should have. I'm sorry. He said it plainly without theater. Not just for the bedroom. For all of it. For every time I looked at what we had and thought it wasn't enough. You were more than enough. I just wasn't ready to deserve that. The apology landed in a place that had been waiting for it. Not to reopen anything. Just to close a door properly instead of leaving it hanging. I know, she said. I hope you find someone who fits the person you're trying to become, Noah. I genuinely do. He nodded once. Stood. At the door he turned back and looked at her in her blue dress in her suite in his father's house, and she watched him understand for the final time what he had walked away from. Then he left. Elena exhaled from the corner where she'd been standing guard. That was almost civilized. Almost, Evelyn agreed. 3 days. 3 days until Evelyn Carter stopped being a woman things happened to and became something she was still in the process of naming. 3 days until she stood in the garden of the Bellini estate and made promises to a man who had started as a transaction and become something she did not have a safe word for yet. She wasn't afraid of the wedding. She was afraid of how much she already meant it. The morning of the wedding, Evelyn woke before her alarm and lay still for a moment listening to the estate breathe around her. She had expected to feel terrified. She had been cataloging that fear for 3 weeks, preparing for it the way you prepare for weather you know is coming. Instead, she felt something quieter and more certain than fear. Something that sat in the center of her chest like a stone that had finally found the bottom. She was ready. Elena arrived at 7 with pastries and a hairstylist, and the particular energy of someone who had decided today was going to go exactly right through sheer force of will. She perched on the edge of the bed and watched Evelyn get ready with the focused attention she brought to everything, and somewhere between the first cup of coffee and the final pin in Evelyn's hair, she said, "He was already awake when I came downstairs at 6, just sitting in his study. He wasn't working. He was just sitting there." Evelyn looked at her in the mirror. "Was he all right?" I asked him the same thing. Elena's expression softened into something private. "He said he was thinking about whether he deserved this." The words landed in Evelyn's chest like something physical. "What did you tell him?" I told him that was probably the most human thing he'd said in years, and that the fact that he was asking the question meant the answer was probably yes. Elena met her eyes in the mirror. He didn't argue, which from him is basically the same as agreeing. Vivienne arrived at 9 with the dress and a seamstress, and the controlled urgency of someone managing a timeline that had already survived 3 location changes and an assassination attempt, and was not going to be derailed by anything as ordinary as wedding day nerves. The gown slid on like something that had been made for the specific woman Evelyn had become over the past 3 weeks, not the one who had driven to Noah's house in her 10-year-old Honda, expecting answers. When she stood in front of the mirror fully dressed, Elena stopped scrolling through her phone and looked up and said nothing for a full 5 seconds. "Well," she said finally, "Noah is going to need significantly more therapy." Evelyn laughed. It was the most genuine laugh she'd produced in a month, and it felt like something releasing in her chest. At 10 o'clock, a knock came at the door that she recognized before she opened it. Victor stood in the hallway in a tuxedo that had been tailored to within an inch of its life, and for a moment, neither of them said anything. He looked at her the way he had only looked at her a handful of times since this began, without the operational distance, without the careful management of his own expression. Just openly. Like she was something he hadn't expected and had stopped trying to explain. "You're not supposed to see the bride before the ceremony," Elena said from somewhere behind Evelyn. "I needed a moment," Victor said without taking his eyes off Evelyn. "Go make sure the judge arrived." Elena made a noise that suggested she found this entire situation both ridiculous and satisfying, and disappeared down the hallway. Victor stepped into the doorway. "How are you?" "Steady," Evelyn said. And it was true. Elena told you about this morning." She did. He was quiet for a moment. Outside, she could hear the string quartet beginning to warm up in the garden, the sound drifting up through windows that had been opened to let in the November air. "I've built things in my life that I'm not proud of," he said. "I've made decisions that cost people something they couldn't get back. I've told myself for 25 years that the structure I was maintaining was worth what it required." He paused. "I'm not sure I deserve to have something clean in the middle of all of it." "Nothing about this is clean," Evelyn said. "We started with revenge, Victor. We negotiated our marriage like a business contract. Your son is downstairs somewhere trying to hold himself together while I marry his father." She stepped closer to him. "But somewhere between the prenuptial agreement and the car accident and every night in your study at 2 in the morning, it became real. That part is clean. Whatever surrounds it, that part is ours." He reached up and touched her face, just his thumb along her cheekbone, brief and careful. "We should go," he said, "before I say something irreversible in a hallway." "You can say it later," she told him. "We'll have time." The garden held 50 people arranged in neat rows under the silk tent that Vivienne had constructed with the precision of someone who understood that beauty was its own form of armor. Security moved through the perimeter in the careful patterns that Evelyn had learned to read over 3 weeks of living inside Victor's world. She registered all of it in the peripheral way she registered everything now present but not consuming. Her attention was on walking toward the man standing at the end of the aisle, under an arch of white roses and purple calla lilies, who turned when she appeared, and whose expression did the thing she had come to love most about him. It went completely unguarded. The judge's voice carried over the garden, with the cadence of someone who had performed this ceremony many times, and understood that the words mattered less than the people saying them. When it was Evelyn's turn, she looked at Victor directly, and spoke from the place that had no strategy in it. "I promise to stand beside you honestly," she said, "to tell you the truth even when it costs something, to build something real from what began as calculation, to be your partner in every way that actually matters." She paused. "And to keep asking you to be smart instead of just brutal, because I think you need someone who believes you're capable of being both." Something moved across Victor's face. A shift so complete it changed the architecture of his expression. He took her hands before the judge invited him to, before it was technically his moment, with the impatience of someone who had stopped following other people's timelines. "I promise to protect you," he said. "Not because you're mine to protect, but because you matter. I promise to be honest with you about what I am, and what this world requires, and to never use that honesty as a way to push you away from it." His voice dropped slightly. "And I promise that everything I told you in that study at 2 a.m, every word of it was true." She understood what he meant. She had been there for every word. The judge pronounced them married. Victor kissed her with a thoroughness that suggested he was not particularly concerned with the 50 witnesses present, and the garden erupted in the particular applause of people who had attended enough strategic alliances to recognize something genuine when it emerged unexpectedly from one. Then, from the back row, a sound she had not expected. Noah was there. She had not known he was coming. Neither from the slight tension that moved through Victor's posture had he. Noah sat in the last chair in the last row. His suit pressed his face composed, and when Evelyn's eyes found him across the garden, he did something she had not seen from him since the beginning of all of this. He simply nodded, not asking for anything, not performing grief for an audience, just acknowledging with the simple dignity of someone who had finally understood what they had lost and had decided to honor it correctly. Victor followed her gaze and saw his son. Something passed over his face that she could not name and did not try to. She took Victor's hand and squeezed it once. He looked at her. "Leave him," she said quietly. "Let him have today." Victor's jaw was tight for a moment. Then it released. "All right," he said. The reception moved with the momentum of an event that had been planned by professionals who understood that 50 carefully vetted guests still required careful management. Toasts were made with language that danced around the specifics of Victor's business in ways that everyone in the room understood and no one acknowledged. Elena gave a speech that made 3 people cry and made Victor look at his daughter with an expression so unguarded that Evelyn had to look away because it felt too private to witness. Near the end of the evening, as staff began the quiet work of clearing the garden, and guests filtered out through security checkpoints that operated with the seamlessness of long practice, Evelyn found herself standing alone for the first time in 12 hours. She was looking at the sky above the estate, stars visible through a gap in the clouds, her shoes off the grass cold against her feet when Noah appeared beside her. She didn't move away. They stood in silence for a moment. "She was released," he said finally. "Jessica, Dad's people let her go this afternoon. She's already left the city." "I know. She called me from the airport." His voice carried the specific flatness of someone who had absorbed something and was still in the process of deciding how to hold it. "She said she was sorry. I don't know if it was real or just the last play in a long game. Does it matter? I don't know yet." He looked at the sky. "I wanted to stop you today. I want you to know that. I stood outside these gates at 7 this morning for 45 minutes, telling myself all the reasons I should walk in and make a scene and blow the whole thing apart." A pause. "And then I thought about what you said. That I loved the idea of you instead of actually you. And I realized that stopping your wedding wouldn't give me you back. It would just take something away from you that you actually chose. That's the most grown-up thing you've ever said to me." "I've been doing a lot of thinking." He almost smiled. "My therapist says I have approximately 30 years of emotional avoidance to work through. Apparently, that's going to take a while. It usually does. He looked at her, then really looked the way he had never quite managed during 18 months of dating, like he was finally willing to see her clearly, even though the clarity cost him something. "Are you happy?" he asked. "Not performing happy, actually happy." She thought about Victor's hands on her face in the doorway that morning. About 2 in the morning conversations that had no agenda. About Elena dropping onto her couch like she belonged there, and a 16-year-old girl who was teaching her what it looked like to be strong, without pretending that strength was painless. "I'm becoming something I didn't have a word for yet," she said. "But yes, I think happy is part of it." Noah nodded once more. "Then I'm glad." He said it like he meant it, and she believed him because the Noah standing in this garden was someone new. Someone still being assembled from the wreckage of who he'd been. And new people sometimes found they were capable of things the old version never managed. He left without drama, walking back through the garden and out through the gate and into whatever his life was going to become without her in it. Victor appeared at her shoulder 30 seconds later. "How long were you watching?" she asked. "Long enough to know you didn't need me to intervene." "I never needed you to intervene. I needed you to trust me to handle it." "I know." He slid his arm around her, and she leaned into him, the silk of her dress against the fabric of his jacket. The cold grass under her bare feet, the sound of the string quartet playing something slow and final somewhere behind them. "That took me longer to learn than it should have." "You're learning now." "Because of you." She tilted her head back to look at him, and he was already looking at her with that expression she had come to need, the way she needed coffee in the morning and honest conversation at night. 3 months later, the Bellini estate settled into a rhythm that surprised Evelyn most by how natural it felt. Her desk sat opposite Victor's in the study they now shared. Hope Harbor's reach had tripled with the funding and political access that came from being married to a man who had been quietly supporting her work for years before she knew his name. Elena visited every few weeks and had started calling her by name, without the careful neutrality of someone managing their emotions around a person they weren't sure about yet. The threats didn't disappear. They never would. But they became something she navigated rather than something that navigated her, and there was a difference she had not understood from the outside looking in. One evening, Victor came into the study with a message from Noah. He read it to her without editorializing. Noah was seeing someone new. A lawyer with no criminal connections who apparently challenged him in ways he hadn't expected. He wanted them to know he was moving forward. He did not ask for anything in return. "Good," Evelyn said, and she meant it in the clean, uncomplicated way of someone who had genuinely let something go. Victor set the message down and looked at her across the desk they shared in the room that had become the truest version of what their life together actually was, and she saw in his expression everything he had said to her at 2 in the morning, and everything he had said at the altar, and everything in between. "Evelyn Bellini," he said, testing the name the way he sometimes did, like he was still slightly surprised it was real. "What are you thinking about?" She set down her pen. "That I walked into your house expecting to find answers about a man who was never worth the question," she said. "And I found something I didn't know I was looking for, something I didn't know I was capable of becoming." She looked at him steadily. "I stopped being afraid of who I might turn into and just turned into her. And she's better than anything I planned." Victor crossed the room and sat on the edge of her desk, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. "She is," he said simply. "She absolutely is." Outside the estate walls, the city moved through its ordinary business of ambition and betrayal, and the 10,000 small negotiations that made up a life. Inside them, Evelyn Carter, who had once been the woman things happened to, sat beside the man she had chosen, with her eyes open in the life she had built, from the ashes of the one that burned down. She had walked into a mansion looking for answers and found something better. She had found herself. And that woman, the one who wore a dead woman's ring and kept her desk beside a criminal kingpin's and loved a complicated man without apology or explanation, was exactly, completely, and finally who she had always been meant to become.